The bruise on Mariah Whitfield's cheekbone had turned a sickly shade of purple by the time she stumbled into the general store in Eager, Arizona. Her husband's grip still burning on her upper arm, where he had dragged her down the dusty Main Street that scorching afternoon in July 1882. She had made the mistake of letting her eyes linger a second too long on the banker's son, as he tipped his hat to her outside the church, and Theodore Whitfield had seen it. His rage immediate and terrifying as he backhanded her right there in front of God and everybody, before hauling her home for a beating that left her ribs aching and her spirit crushed beneath the weight of 3 years of marriage that felt more like a prison sentence than a partnership. Now she stood at the counter, trying to count out coins for flour with trembling fingers, when the door opened and a tall cowboy walked in, his boots striking the wooden floor with a confidence that made her instinctively flinch. She kept her eyes down, focused on the worn wood of the counter, her dark hair falling forward to hide the evidence of Theodore's fury. "Madam, you dropped this," a deep voice said, and she saw a tanned hand extend toward her, holding a penny that had slipped from her shaking grasp. "Thank you," Mariah whispered, reaching for the coin without lifting her gaze. "Look at me," the voice said, not demanding but gentle, almost a request. Her breath caught in her throat. She could not, would not, dare not look at another man, not after what had happened earlier, not when Theodore might hear about it and come for her again with his fists and his belt and his cruel words that cut deeper than any physical blow. "I cannot," she said, her voice barely audible. "Why not?" The cowboy's tone held genuine curiosity, without any hint of offense. Mariah's throat tightened with the threat of tears. "My husband does not approve of me looking at other men. He made that very clear today." There was a long pause, and she could feel the cowboy's presence like warmth from a fire, steady and solid beside her. "That's so," he said finally, and she heard something hard edge into his voice. "Well, that's about the sorriest thing I've heard all week." A man who beats a woman for something as natural as looking around her ought to be horsewhipped. The shopkeeper, old Mr. Henderson, cleared his throat nervously. "Yates, maybe you should mind your own business." "Maybe I should," the cowboy named Yates agreed, but he did not move. "But I've got a powerful dislike for bullies, Henderson, and you know it." Mariah felt something shift inside her chest, a tiny spark of something she had thought Theodore had beaten out of her months ago. She dared to lift her eyes just enough to see the cowboy's boots, worn leather with silver spurs that caught the afternoon light streaming through the window. "You don't understand," she said. "He is my husband. He has rights." "Rights," Yates repeated, and the word sounded bitter on his tongue. "Madam, I've been working cattle from Texas to Montana for near about 10 years now, and I've seen some ugly things in my time. But I'll tell you what I believe with my whole heart. No man has the right to put his hands on a woman in anger. I don't care what the law says or what some preacher might claim. That ain't right, and it ain't decent." She finally looked up then, unable to stop herself, and found herself staring into the most striking pair of green eyes she had ever seen. Yates Brennan was probably 30 years old, with sun-weathered skin and dark blonde hair that curled slightly at his collar. His face was honest and open, with strong features that spoke of both strength and kindness. He wore a simple brown vest over a cream-colored shirt, and a bandana tied loosely around his neck. But it was his eyes that held her, full of concern and something fierce that made her want to weep. "You've got a bad bruise there," he said quietly, his gaze taking in her injured face with an expression that looked almost pained. "And the way you are holding yourself tells me he did not stop with just your face." Mariah looked away quickly, shame flooding through her. "I should go. He will be wondering where I am." "Wait," Yates said, then turned to the shopkeeper. "Henderson, pack up what the lady needs. Put it on my account." "I cannot accept that," Mariah protested. "Theodore would be furious." "Then don't tell him," Yates replied simply. "Consider it a kindness from one human being to another. No strings attached." Mr. Henderson packed the flour along with some sugar and coffee beans without another word, clearly wanting this uncomfortable situation to end. Mariah took the package with shaking hands, unable to meet Yates's eyes again. "Thank you," she managed. "That is very kind." "Madam," Yates said as she turned to leave, "my name is Yates Brennan. I'm working at the Diamond Bar Ranch about 5 miles north of town. If you ever need help, for any reason, you come find me. You hear?" She nodded once quickly and fled the store before he could see the tears that were now streaming down her face. That night, Theodore came home drunk from the saloon and demanded to know why she had taken so long at the store. Mariah lied and said she had stopped to help Mrs. Patterson with her laundry, and Theodore seemed satisfied enough with that answer to leave her alone. She lay awake in their small house on the edge of town, staring at the ceiling and thinking about green eyes and a voice that promised protection without asking for anything in return. The next week passed in a blur of housework and careful navigation of Theodore's unpredictable moods. He worked at the lumber mill and came home each evening covered in sawdust and looking for reasons to be angry. Mariah had learned over 3 years of marriage to make herself small and quiet, to anticipate his needs before he voiced them, to never contradict or question. But something had changed inside her since that day in the general store. The spark Yates Brennan had ignited refused to be extinguished. She found herself thinking about him at odd moments, wondering what it would be like to be married to a man who believed a woman should not be beaten for looking around her. The thoughts felt dangerous and thrilling, like standing too close to the edge of a cliff. On Sunday, Theodore forced her to attend church with him so the whole town could see what a proper, God-fearing couple they were. Mariah wore her best dress, a faded blue calico that had been new when they married, and kept her eyes down as they took their seats near the back. The Reverend droned on about obedience and duty, and Mariah felt the familiar numbness settle over her like a heavy blanket. Then the door opened, and Yates Brennan walked in. He was cleaned up, wearing dark trousers and a pressed white shirt, his hair combed back and his hat in his hands. He took a seat across the aisle and 3 rows up, and Mariah could not stop herself from watching the back of his head, the way his shoulders filled out his shirt, the respectful way he bowed his head during prayers. Theodore noticed where her gaze had drifted and pinched her thigh hard enough to bruise. She gasped and looked down immediately, her heart pounding with fear and something else she did not dare name. After the service, people gathered outside to socialize in the morning sunshine. Theodore kept a possessive hand on Mariah's elbow as he talked with the other mill workers, his fingers digging in hard enough to leave marks. She stood silent beside him, as was expected, until she heard a familiar voice. "Reverend, that was a fine sermon," Yates said, shaking hands with the elderly minister. "Though I confess I've always thought that bit about wives obeying husbands gets misused something terrible. My own mother used to say that a marriage should be a partnership, with both folks respecting each other equal." The Reverend looked taken aback, and several of the nearby men grumbled their disapproval. Theodore's grip on Mariah's arm tightened painfully. "Your mother sounds like she had some radical ideas, Mr. Brennan," the Reverend said stiffly. "Maybe so," Yates agreed cheerfully. "But she and my father were married 42 years before he passed, and I never once saw him raise a hand to her or raise his voice in anger. They worked their ranch together, side by side, and he valued her opinion as much as his own. seemed to work out pretty well for them. Some women need a firm hand, Theodore said loudly, and Mariah felt herself go cold. Especially ones who don't know their place. Yates turned and looked directly at Theodore, his green eyes hard as flint. Is that so? Well, I reckon any man who needs to use his fists to keep his wife in line is admitting he's not man enough to earn her respect honestly. The crowd went silent. Theodore's face turned red, then purple with rage. He released Mariah's arm and took a step toward Yates, his hands clenching into fists. "You calling me out, cowboy?" Theodore snarled. "I'm stating a fact," Yates replied calmly, not backing down an inch. "You beat your wife, Whitfield. Everyone in this town knows it, even if they pretend not to see. That makes you a coward in my book." Theodore lunged, but Yates was faster. He sidestepped the clumsy attack and caught Theodore's arm, twisting it behind his back in a smooth motion that spoke of long practice. Theodore yelped in pain and surprise. "Now you listen to me," Yates said, his voice low and dangerous. "I'm going to let you go and you are going to walk away. And from this moment on, if I hear that you've laid another finger on your wife, I'm going to come looking for you. And I promise you won't enjoy what happens when I find you. We clear?" He released Theodore with a slight shove. Theodore stumbled forward, caught himself, and turned back with murder in his eyes. But something in Yates's calm, steady gaze must have convinced him that the cowboy meant every word, because he grabbed Mariah's wrist and dragged her away from the church at a near run. The beating she received when they got home was the worst yet. Theodore used his belt this time, welts rising across her back and shoulders as he screamed about disrespect and humiliation and ungrateful wives who made him look like a fool in front of the whole town. Mariah bit down on a rag to keep from screaming, tears streaming down her face, until Theodore finally exhausted himself and passed out on the bed. She waited until his snores filled the small house, then slowly, painfully pulled herself to her feet. Every movement sent agony through her battered body, but she knew with absolute certainty that if she stayed, Theodore would eventually kill her. Whether it was in a drunken rage or a calculated beating, the end result would be the same. She had to leave. Mariah packed a small bag with shaking hands, taking only what she could carry. A change of clothes, her mother's Bible, the few dollars she had managed to hide away over the years. Then she slipped out into the night, moving as quietly as possible despite the pain. The moon was nearly full, providing enough light to see the road north out of town. 5 miles to the Diamond Bar Ranch, 5 miles to safety, if Yates Brennan had meant what he said. Mariah walked slowly, each step an exercise in endurance, her back screaming in protest. She had made it perhaps 2 miles when she heard hoofbeats behind her. Terror seized her heart. Theodore had woken up and come after her. She tried to move faster, but her body would not cooperate. The rider came alongside her and she closed her eyes, preparing for the worst. "Mariah," Yates's voice said gently, and her eyes flew open in shock. He sat astride a beautiful bay horse, looking down at her with concern etched across his features. In the moonlight, he looked almost unreal, like something out of a dream. "How did you know?" she whispered. "I didn't," he admitted. "But I couldn't stop thinking about what might happen after I confronted your husband today. I've been riding the road between town and the ranch all evening, hoping I was wrong but afraid I was right." His eyes took in her hunched posture, the way she held herself. "He hurt you bad, didn't he?" She nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Yates dismounted in one fluid motion and approached her carefully, as though she were a wounded animal that might bolt. "Will you let me help you?" "I was trying to find you," Mariah said, her voice breaking. "You said if I needed help I should come to the Diamond Bar." "You did exactly right," Yates said firmly. "Can you ride, or should I get a wagon?" "I can ride," she said, though she was not entirely certain that was true. Yates helped her mount his horse with infinite gentleness, his hands steady and sure. Then he swung up behind her, careful not to touch her injured back, and gathered the reins. Mariah found herself leaning back against his solid chest, feeling safer than she had in years. "You are going to be all right now," Yates said quietly. "I promise you that. No one is going to hurt you again." The ride to the Diamond Bar took less than an hour. The ranch was bigger than Mariah had expected, with a large main house, a bunkhouse for the hands, several barns and corrals full of horses. Yates guided his mount to the main house and dismounted, then helped Mariah down with the same careful gentleness. An older woman appeared on the porch, lamplight spilling out behind her. She was perhaps 50, with iron-gray hair and a kind face that showed the lines of a lifetime spent smiling. "Yates, what's happened?" she asked, then saw Mariah's bruised face in the lamplight and her expression hardened. "Oh, that poor child. Bring her in at once. Mrs. Barnes owns the Diamond Bar," Yates explained as he helped Mariah up the porch steps. "Her husband passed 2 years back, and she runs the place now with the help of hired hands like me. You will be safe here." "Inside, Mrs." Barnes took one look at the careful way Mariah moved and said, "Let me see your back, dear." Mariah hesitated, then slowly unbuttoned her dress with shaking fingers. Mrs. Barnes gasped when she saw the welts and bruises covering Mariah's back and shoulders. "That monster," she breathed. "Yates, fetch my medicine kit and heat some water. We need to clean these wounds before they get infected." Yates nodded and disappeared into the kitchen. Mrs. Barnes helped Mariah into a chair and began gently cleaning the wounds with warm water and soap. Mariah bit her lip to keep from crying out, but the older woman's touch was as gentle as possible. "You are Theodore Whitfield's wife, aren't you?" Mrs. Barnes asked. "I have seen you in town. I always wondered about those bruises you tried to hide." "I am sorry for the trouble," Mariah whispered. "Trouble?" Mrs. Barnes looked shocked. "Child, you have done nothing wrong. That husband of yours is the one who should be apologizing, though I doubt he has the decency to do so." She applied salve to the worst of the wounds, and the cooling sensation brought some relief. "You are welcome to stay here as long as you need. I could use another woman around this place anyway, with all these rough cowboys tracking mud through my clean house." Yates returned with clean bandages, and Mrs. Barnes wrapped Mariah's torso carefully. Then she helped her into a clean nightgown and led her to a small bedroom off the kitchen. "You rest now," Mrs. Barnes said firmly. "In the morning, we will figure out what to do next." Mariah lay down on the soft bed and felt tears slide down her face. These were not tears of pain or fear, but of relief and gratitude. She had escaped. She was safe. And for the first time in 3 years, she felt like maybe, just maybe, her life might be worth living again. She heard voices in the other room. Yates and Mrs. Barnes talking in low tones. "He will come looking for her," Yates said. "Let him try," Mrs. Barnes replied grimly. "I have a shotgun and I know how to use it. Besides, you will be here." "I will," Yates agreed. "I meant what I said, Ellen. No one is going to hurt her again, not while I am alive to prevent it." Mariah closed her eyes and let sleep take her, feeling safer than she had in years. She woke the next morning to sunshine streaming through the window and the smell of coffee and bacon. For a moment, she forgot where she was, and panic seized her. Then she remembered and slowly sat up, wincing at the pain in her back. Mrs. Barnes appeared in the doorway with a cup of coffee. "How are you feeling, dear?" "Sore," Mariah admitted. "But better than last night." "Good. I have breakfast ready when you feel up to eating. Take your time." Mariah dressed slowly in her own clothes, which someone had washed and dried overnight, then made her way to the kitchen. Yates sat at the large wooden table, eating eggs and bacon. He stood immediately when she entered. "Morning," he said. "Did you sleep all right?" "Better than I have in a long time," Mariah answered honestly. She took a seat at the table and Mrs. Barnes placed a plate of food in front of her. "Eat up," the older woman said. "You are far too thin. That man was not even feeding you properly, was he?" Mariah shook her head. Theodore had always eaten first and best, leaving her whatever scraps remained. She ate slowly, savoring every bite of the delicious food. "We need to discuss what happens now," Yates said gently. "Theodore is going to come looking for you. You are his legal wife and the law is on his side, unfortunately." "I know," Mariah said quietly, "but I cannot go back. I would rather die than go back to him." "You are not going back," Mrs. Barnes said firmly, "and you are certainly not going to die. We just need to figure out how to handle this legally." "There is a judge in Silver City," Yates said thoughtfully. "Judge Morrison. He is a fair man, and he has been known to grant divorces in cases of extreme cruelty. It is rare, but it happens. Silver City is 2 days' ride from here, Mrs. Barnes pointed out. "Then we will make the trip," Yates said, looking at Mariah. "If you are willing, we can leave tomorrow once you are a bit more healed. I will take you to Silver City, we will see the judge and hopefully get you legally free of Theodore Whitfield. You would do that for me?" Mariah asked, scarcely able to believe it. "Madam, look at me," Yates said, and this time it was not a request but an invitation. She lifted her eyes to his, and the warmth she saw there made her breath catch. "I told you yesterday that you could look at me all you want, and I meant it. I also told you I would help you, and I meant that too. I don't make promises I cannot keep." "Why?" The question burst out of her before she could stop it. "Why would you help a stranger like this? What do you want from me?" Yates's expression grew serious. "I don't want anything from you except the chance to do what's right. My father raised me to believe that a man's character is measured by how he treats those who cannot defend themselves. You needed help, and I was in a position to give it. That is all there is to it." But Mariah could see something else in his eyes, something that made her heart beat faster. It was too soon and too complicated to name, but it was there nonetheless. "Thank you," she said softly. "I will go to Silver City with you." The rest of that day passed quietly. Mrs. Barnes insisted that Mariah rest and recover her strength. Yates went about his regular work on the ranch, but Mariah noticed that he stayed close to the house, always within earshot. She spent the afternoon sitting on the porch, watching him work with the horses in the corral. He moved with easy confidence, his hands gentle but firm as he trained a young mare to accept a saddle. "He is a good man," Mrs. Barnes said, coming out to sit beside her with her mending. "My late husband hired him 4 years ago, and I have never once regretted keeping him on after George passed. Yates works harder than any 2 men, never complains, and treats everyone with respect. The other hands look up to him." "Has he ever been married?" Mariah asked, then immediately felt her face flush. "I am sorry. That is none of my business." Mrs. Barnes smiled knowingly. "He was engaged once, about 6 years ago. Pretty little thing named Sarah from a ranch down in Texas. But she decided she did not want to be a rancher's wife after all and ran off with a railroad man who promised her a house in San Francisco. Broke Yates's heart pretty thoroughly. He has not looked seriously at a woman since, as far as I know." Mariah absorbed this information, feeling oddly protective of the cowboy who had saved her. That was cruel of her. "It was," Mrs. Barnes agreed, "but maybe it was for the best. Sarah was never going to be happy with ranch life. She wanted fancy things and city society. Yates needs someone who can appreciate the simple things, someone genuine." She gave Mariah a meaningful look, and Mariah found herself blushing again. That evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and gold over the mountains, Theodore Whitfield appeared at the ranch gates. Mariah was helping Mrs. Barnes prepare supper when they heard shouting outside. Her blood went cold, and she dropped the potato she had been peeling. "Mariah!" Theodore's voice bellowed. "Get out here right now. You are coming home." Yates appeared from the barn, moving quickly but calmly toward the gate where Theodore stood. Several other ranch hands had also stopped their work, watching carefully. "You need to leave, Whitfield," Yates said, his voice carrying across the yard. "Mariah does not want to see you." "She is my wife," Theodore shouted. "You got no right to keep her from me." "I have every right to give shelter to a woman fleeing violence," Yates replied. "Now get off this property before I make you leave." Theodore tried to push past Yates, but the cowboy caught him and shoved him back firmly. Theodore stumbled, caught himself, and came up swinging. Yates ducked the wild punch and landed a solid blow to Theodore's midsection that doubled him over. "I warned you," Yates said, no longer bothering to hide his anger. "You have no power here, Whitfield. Mariah is under Mrs. Barnes's protection now, and mine. The only way you are getting to her is through me, and I promise you that will not end well for you." Theodore struggled to catch his breath, his face purple with rage and humiliation. "The law is on my side. The sheriff will make her come back, maybe," Yates acknowledged, "but we will deal with that when the time comes. For now, you need to leave, Mrs." Barnes had come out onto the porch, shotgun in hand. "You heard him, Mr. Whitfield. Get off my land. If you come back uninvited, I will consider it trespassing and act accordingly." Theodore looked between Yates, Mrs. Barnes, and the handful of ranch hands who had gathered. He was outnumbered and outmatched, and he knew it. With a final venomous glare toward the house, he turned and stalked back to his horse. "This is not over," he shouted as he mounted. "She is my wife, and I will get her back." He rode off in a cloud of dust. Yates watched until he disappeared down the road, then turned and walked back to the house. Mariah met him at the door, her whole body shaking. "He won't give up," she said. "He will go to the sheriff. He will make me go back." "Not if we can get to Silver City first," Yates said. "We leave at first light tomorrow. Can you manage the ride?" Mariah straightened her spine, drawing on reserves of strength she did not know she possessed. "I can manage." That night, she lay awake in her small room, listening to the sounds of the ranch settling for the night. Horses nickering in the barn, the distant howl of a coyote, the creak of the house as it cooled. And underneath it all, the steady sound of footsteps as Yates paced the porch, keeping watch. She got up and wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, then slipped out of her room. Yates stood near the porch railing, silhouetted against the starlit sky. "You should be resting," he said without turning around. "So should you," Mariah replied, coming to stand beside him. "You do not have to guard me all night." "Yes, I do," Yates said simply. "I will not rest easy until you are safely away from here and legally free of that man." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, looking out at the dark landscape. The moon was bright enough to cast shadows, and the air smelled of sage and horses. "Why are you really doing this?" Mariah asked quietly. "And please do not say it is just because it is the right thing to do. There has to be more to it than that." Yates was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "When I was 12 years old, we had neighbors on the ranch next to ours. The McAllister family. Nice folks, or so we thought. Then one day, Mrs. McAllister showed up at our door with her 2 little kids, beaten so bad she could barely walk. Her husband had always been rough with her, but that time he had gone too far. My mother took her in, nursed her back to health. My father rode into town and had words with Mr. McAllister that resulted in the man leaving the territory and never coming back." He turned to look at Mariah, his green eyes serious in the moonlight. Mrs. McAllister and her kids stayed with us for 6 months while she got back on her feet. Then she sold the ranch and moved back east to be with her family. But before she left, she told my mother that if they had not helped her, her husband would have killed her eventually. She said my parents saved her life. Mariah felt tears prick her eyes. So you learned from them. I learned that standing by and doing nothing when someone needs help makes you just as guilty as the person doing the harm, Yates said. And I learned that women are not property, no matter what the law says. They are human beings who deserve to be treated with dignity and respect. Your parents sound like remarkable people, Mariah said. They were, Yates agreed. I lost my mother to pneumonia 5 years ago. It nearly destroyed my father. He followed her about a year later. Doctors said it was his heart, but I think he just could not stand to be in this world without her. That is what real love looks like, Mariah. A partnership of equals who cannot imagine life without each other, not one person terrorizing the other into submission. Mariah found herself moving closer to him, drawn by the warmth and strength he radiated. I used to think marriage would be like that. When Theodore was courting me, he was so charming. He brought me flowers and said all the right things. My father had just died and my mother could not keep the farm running by herself. Theodore seemed like the answer to all our problems. When did it start? Yates asked gently. Our wedding night, Mariah said, the words bitter in her mouth. He had been drinking, and when I said I was tired and asked if we could wait, he said a wife's duty was to submit to her husband whenever he demanded it. He forced himself on me, and when I cried, he hit me for the first time. Told me to stop being so dramatic. She wrapped her arms around herself. It just got worse from there. He wanted absolute control over every aspect of my life. Where I went, who I spoke to, what I wore. And if I disobeyed, even accidentally, he would beat me. Yates's jaw clenched, and Mariah could see him fighting to control his anger. I am so sorry that happened to you. You deserved better. You still deserve better. Do I? Mariah asked, the question raw and vulnerable. Sometimes I wonder if Theodore was right. If I was a better wife, maybe he would not have gotten so angry. No, Yates said fiercely, turning to face her fully. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently cupped her face in his hands. Listen to me, Mariah. What he did to you was not your fault, not in any way. There is no excuse, no justification for a man to beat his wife. You could have burned dinner every night, talked back, refused him 100 times, and it still would not give him the right to put his hands on you in anger. Do you understand me? Mariah stared up at him, seeing the conviction blazing in his eyes, and felt something break open inside her chest. All the guilt and shame she had been carrying for 3 years suddenly seemed lighter. She nodded slowly, and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. You can look at me all you want, Yates said softly, echoing his words from the general store. You can look at whoever you want, talk to whoever you want, be whoever you want to be. That is your right as a human being. Mariah realized she was indeed looking at him, really looking, maybe for the first time since they had met. She saw the kindness in his eyes, the strength in his jaw, the gentleness in the way he held her face as though she were something precious and fragile. And she felt something she had not felt in years. Hope. Thank you, she whispered, for everything. Yates released her gently and stepped back as though aware they were treading into dangerous territory. We should both get some rest. Tomorrow will be a long day. Mariah nodded and went back inside. But she lay awake for a long time, thinking about green eyes and gentle hands and the possibility that maybe, someday, she could have the kind of love Yates's parents had shared. They left at dawn, Yates and Mariah riding together on 2 strong horses borrowed from the Diamond Bar's stock. Mrs. Barnes packed them enough food for several days, and made Mariah promise to send word once they reached Silver City. The ride was long and hot, the July sun beating down mercilessly as they traveled south through the high desert country. Yates set a steady pace, stopping frequently to let Mariah rest. Her back still ached from the beating, but she refused to complain. She was finally taking control of her own life, and no amount of physical discomfort was going to stop her now. They talked as they rode, and Mariah found herself opening up to Yates in a way she had never been able to with anyone else. She told him about her childhood on her father's farm, about learning to read from her mother who had been a schoolteacher before marriage, about her dreams of maybe teaching someday herself. "You would make a fine teacher," Yates said. "You have a gentle way about you, but there is steel underneath. Kids need that combination." "What about you?" Mariah asked. "Did you always want to be a cowboy?" Yates laughed. "I did not have much choice being born on a ranch, but I cannot imagine doing anything else. I love working with horses, being outdoors, the freedom of it. Some men need fancy houses and important jobs to feel like they matter. I just need a good horse, honest work, and the sky over my head." "That sounds wonderful," Mariah said wistfully. Theodore hated the outdoors. He wanted to be a big man in town, important and respected. He was always scheming about how to make more money, get a better position at the mill. It was never enough. "Some men are like that," Yates observed. "Always chasing something they think will make them happy, never realizing that happiness comes from inside, from being content with what you have and who you are." They camped that night beside a small creek, Yates building a fire while Mariah unpacked their food supplies. The desert cooled rapidly once the sun set, and Mariah was grateful for the warmth of the flames. They ate beans and bacon, washing it down with coffee Yates brewed in a battered tin pot. "Tell me about your engagement," Mariah said, then immediately regretted the bold question. "I am sorry. Mrs. Barnes mentioned it, and I should not have brought it up." Yates shrugged, poking at the fire with a stick. "It is all right. Sarah was pretty and fun, and I thought I loved her. But looking back, I realize I was more in love with the idea of being in love than with her actual self. She wanted things I could not give her, and I wanted a partner who would work beside me. We were never really suited." "Do you think you will marry someday?" Mariah asked. "Maybe," Yates said, looking up at her across the fire. "If I find the right woman, someone genuine and strong and kind. Someone who understands that love is not about pretty words and grand gestures, but about showing up every day and choosing each other, even when it is hard." The way he looked at her when he said it made Mariah's heart race. She looked away, flustered, and Yates smiled slightly. "You should get some rest," he said. "I will take first watch." "Watch for what?" Mariah asked. "Do you think Theodore followed us?" "I think it is better to be cautious," Yates replied. "Besides, there are other dangers out here, snakes, mountain lions, the occasional bandit. I will feel better knowing you are safe." Mariah wrapped herself in her blanket and lay down near the fire, but sleep was a long time coming. She was hyper-aware of Yates sitting nearby, his presence both comforting and unsettling in ways she could not fully articulate. They reached Silver City late the following afternoon, dusty and tired but relieved to have made the journey without incident. The town was larger than Eager, with a proper hotel, several saloons, a bank, and a courthouse. Yates arranged for 2 rooms at the hotel, then escorted Mariah to a dress shop so she could purchase something suitable for meeting the judge. "I cannot afford this," Mariah protested when the shopkeeper showed her a lovely green dress. "I can," Yates said firmly. "Consider it part of the rescue package. Besides, you will make a better impression on the judge if you look respectable." The dress fit perfectly, bringing out the color of Mariah's eyes and making her look, for the first time in years, like something other than a beaten-down, terrified woman. She barely recognized her own reflection. They met with Judge Morrison the next morning. He was an older man with shrewd eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. He listened carefully as Mariah recounted her 3 years of marriage to Theodore, her voice shaking but steady. She showed him the bruises and scars, and Yates provided testimony about what he had witnessed. "This is a serious matter, Mrs. Whitfield," the judge said when she had finished. "Arizona territory law does allow for divorce in cases of extreme cruelty, but it is rarely granted. Your husband will have the right to contest it, and the case could drag on for months." "I understand," Mariah said, "but I cannot go back to him. I would rather face poverty and social ruin than spend another day living in fear." Judge Morrison studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "I believe you. I will grant you a preliminary separation order effective immediately. That means your husband cannot legally force you to return to him while the divorce proceedings are underway. I will also issue a restraining order preventing him from coming within 100 feet of you. If he violates either order, he will be arrested." Relief flooded through Mariah so powerfully that she felt lightheaded. "Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you so much." "Do not thank me yet," the judge said. "This is just the beginning. The actual divorce will take time and money. Do you have somewhere safe to stay?" "She is under my protection," Yates said firmly. "And Mrs. Barnes has offered her a place at the Diamond Bar Ranch for as long as she needs it." "Good," Judge Morrison said. "Mrs. Whitfield, I want you to check in with this office once a month by letter or telegram to update me on your situation. And if your husband threatens or harms you in any way, you report it immediately. Understood?" "Yes, sir," Mariah said, feeling tears of gratitude prick her eyes. They left the courthouse with the precious legal documents in hand. Mariah felt as though a massive weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She was not free yet, not completely, but she was one huge step closer. "We should celebrate," Yates said, grinning at her obvious relief. "Have you ever had a real restaurant meal?" Mariah shook her head. Theodore had never taken her out to eat, claiming it was a waste of money. "Then we are going to the best restaurant in Silver City," Yates declared. "My treat." They ate steak and potatoes in a dining room with white tablecloths and candles, and Mariah felt like royalty. Yates was charming and funny, telling her stories about his adventures working various ranches across the territory. He made her laugh, something she had not done in so long that her cheeks hurt from the unfamiliar exercise. "What will you do now?" Yates asked as they finished their meal with coffee and apple pie. "Mrs. Barnes meant what she said about you staying at the Diamond Bar, but you should know you have options." "I would like to stay," Mariah said without hesitation, "at least until the divorce is final. After that, I am not sure. Maybe I could find work as a teacher or a seamstress. Something to support myself independently." "You could stay permanently," Yates said carefully. "Mrs. Barnes is getting older, and she has mentioned wanting to take on more household help. You could work for her officially, earn a salary, have a real position. It would give you security and independence. Would you be comfortable with that?" Mariah asked, meeting his eyes. "Having me around all the time," Yates smiled slowly. "I think I would be very comfortable with that." The air between them felt charged with possibility, but neither of them pushed it further. It was too soon, the situation too complicated. But the foundation was being laid for something that could, in time, become something beautiful. They stayed in Silver City for 3 more days, waiting for the legal documents to be properly filed and copies made. Yates showed Mariah around the town, taking her to visit the small school and introducing her to the schoolmaster, who expressed interest in having a female teacher for the younger children if one could be found. He bought her books, a luxury she had never been able to afford, and they spent an evening reading by lamplight in the hotel parlor. On the fourth day, they began the journey back to Eager. Mariah felt different than she had on the way down, lighter somehow, more herself. She rode beside Yates in comfortable companionship, talking about everything and nothing. They were about 10 miles from the Diamond Bar when they encountered trouble. 3 men on horseback blocked the road ahead, their faces covered with bandanas. "Well, well," one of them said, and Mariah recognized the voice with a sinking feeling. "Theodore. Thought you could run away from me, did you?" Yates moved his horse protectively in front of Mariah. "You are violating a court order, Whitfield. Turn around now and maybe the judge will go easy on you." "I do not give a damn about what some judge in Silver City says," Theodore snarled. "That is my wife, and I am taking her home." The 2 men with him spread out, trying to flank Yates and Mariah. Yates's hand moved to rest on the revolver at his hip. "Last warning," Yates said, his voice deadly calm. "Ride away now or this will end badly for you." Theodore laughed. "You are outnumbered, Cowboy. Hand over my wife and we will let you ride on." "Not a chance," Yates replied. Everything happened fast after that. Theodore spurred his horse forward, and Yates drew his revolver with lightning speed, firing a shot that sent Theodore's hat flying. The other 2 men reached for their own weapons, but Yates was already moving, his horse charging forward to meet them. He fired again, the shot hitting one man's horse in the flank just enough to make it rear and throw its rider. Mariah, terrified but determined not to be helpless, urged her own horse forward and swung her reins at the third man as he tried to grab for her. The leather caught him across the face, and he cursed and fell back. Yates had dismounted and now stood with his revolver trained on Theodore, who had also been thrown from his spooked horse. "You made a big mistake, Whitfield. Attempted kidnapping, violating a restraining order, these are serious charges. You cannot prove anything," Theodore spat. "I will say you attacked us." "And I will testify otherwise," Mariah said, finding her voice. She dismounted and walked to stand beside Yates. "I am not afraid of you anymore, Theodore. You have no power over me now." Theodore's face twisted with rage and hatred. "You will regret this, both of you." "I doubt that," Yates said. "Now you are going to get on your horse and ride straight to the sheriff's office in Eager. You are going to turn yourself in and face the consequences of your actions. If you do not, I will hunt you down and drag you there myself. Your choice." Theodore looked between them, clearly calculating his odds. Whatever he saw in Yates's eyes must have convinced him that the cowboy meant every word, because he slowly got to his feet and caught his horse's reins. "This is not over," he said, but his voice lacked conviction now. "Yes, it is," Mariah said firmly. "It has been over for a long time. I was just too scared to admit it, but I am not scared anymore." Theodore and his 2 companions rode off, and Yates watched them until they disappeared from sight. Then he turned to Mariah. "You were amazing back there," he said, genuine admiration in his voice. "Hitting that man with your reins took courage." "I learned from a good teacher," Mariah replied, smiling at him. "You taught me that I do not have to be helpless." They remounted and continued toward the Diamond Bar, both of them keeping alert in case Theodore doubled back. But they reached the ranch without further incident, and Mrs. Barnes met them at the door with relief written all over her face. "Thank God you are both safe," she said, embracing Mariah. "I have been worried sick. Theodore came by here ranting and raving about going to get you back. I sent one of the hands to follow him and report back, but I have not heard anything yet." Yates explained what had happened on the road, and Mrs. Barnes shook her head. "That man is a fool, attacking you out in the open like that with a court order against him. He has sealed his own fate." News came the next day that Theodore had indeed turned himself in to the sheriff, probably realizing that running would only make things worse. He was being held in the Eager jail pending trial for violating the restraining order and attempted abduction. The sheriff rode out to the Diamond Bar to take statements from Yates and Mariah, and he seemed genuinely sympathetic to her situation. "Between you and me, Mrs. Whitfield, I have known for a while that Theodore was no good," he said. "But my hands were tied by the law. Now that he has given me cause, I can do something about it. He will be going to prison for this. Mark my words." The trial took place 2 weeks later. Mariah testified about years of abuse, backed up by testimony from neighbors who had heard her screams and seen her bruises. Yates described the confrontation on the road, and the 2 men who had been with Theodore turned on him quickly, claiming he had threatened them into helping him. Judge Morrison, who traveled from Silver City to preside over the case, sentenced Theodore to 5 years in the territorial prison. He also granted Mariah's divorce, making it one of the fastest proceedings of its kind in Arizona Territory history. "Mrs. Whitfield," the judge said as he delivered his verdict, "you are hereby legally divorced from Theodore Whitfield. All property and assets acquired during your marriage are awarded to you. You are a free woman." Mariah burst into tears, overwhelmed by relief and gratitude. Yates, sitting in the courtroom gallery, smiled broadly. After 3 years of nightmare, it was finally over. The months that followed were a time of healing and growth for Mariah. She took Mrs. Barnes up on her offer to work at the Diamond Bar, officially hired on as the housekeeper with a fair salary that allowed her to start saving money. She also began studying again, preparing to take the examination to become a certified teacher, and she fell in love. It happened gradually, like the desert warming under the morning sun. Yates courted her properly, with permission from Mrs. Barnes acting as her guardian. He took her riding through the beautiful high country, showed her how to rope a calf, taught her to shoot so she could defend herself if need be. They talked for hours about everything under the sun, discovering shared values and dreams. He kissed her for the first time on a cool evening in October, as they stood watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson. It was gentle and respectful, everything Theodore had never been, and Mariah found herself kissing him back with all the pent-up longing and hope in her heart. "I love you," Yates said simply when they broke apart. "I think I started falling in love with you that day in the general store when you were so scared but still so brave. But I wanted to give you time to heal, to be sure of what you wanted." "I am sure," Mariah said, tears streaming down her face again, but happy tears this time. "I love you too, Yates. You saved my life in every way a person can be saved." "You saved yourself," Yates corrected gently. "You were the one who walked away. You were the one who chose to fight for your own freedom. I just helped a little bit along the way." They married the following spring in April of 1883 with Mrs. Barnes and half the town in attendance. The ceremony took place at the Diamond Bar under clear blue skies, and Mariah wore a dress of white lace that Mrs. Barnes had insisted on buying for her. "I never had a daughter," the older woman said, wiping tears from her eyes. "But if I had, I would have wanted her to be just like you." Reverend Patterson, who had married Mariah to Theodore 3 years earlier, seemed genuinely happy to be performing a ceremony that he could be proud of this time. His sermon was about partnership and mutual respect, and more than one person in the audience nodded in agreement. Yates looked impossibly handsome in his best suit, his green eyes shining as Mariah walked toward him. When she reached his side, he took her hands and said his vows with a voice that rang out clear and strong. "I promise to love you, honor you, and respect you all the days of my life." I promise to be your partner in all things, to value your opinions and dreams as much as my own. I promise never to raise my hand or my voice in anger, but to work through our problems with patience and kindness. And I promise that you will always be free to be exactly who you are." Mariah repeated her own vows with tears streaming down her face, and when Reverend Patterson pronounced them husband and wife, Yates kissed her with a tenderness that made everyone watching smile. They moved into a small house on Diamond Bar land that Mrs. Barnes gave them as a wedding present, close enough to the main house to help with the ranch but far enough away to have privacy. Yates continued working with the horses, and Mariah took the examination to become a teacher, passing with high marks. The school in Eager hired her immediately to teach the younger children, and she found profound joy in shaping young minds and giving them the education she had valued so highly as a child. The children loved her, responding to her gentle but firm approach, and their parents respected her. Life was not perfect. There were hard days when Mariah had nightmares about Theodore, waking in the night panicked and afraid until Yates held her and reminded her that she was safe. There were financial struggles as they learned to manage a household together. There were disagreements about everything from where to plant the garden to whether they could afford to buy more cattle. But they worked through each challenge together, with respect and communication, and a determination to be better than what Mariah had endured before. Yates was true to his word, never raising his voice or his hand, always treating her as an equal partner. Their first child, a son, was born in the winter of 1884. They named him Joseph, after Yates's father, and he had his father's green eyes and his mother's dark hair. Mariah had been terrified during her pregnancy, haunted by memories of how Theodore had reacted to her body changing, but Yates had been nothing but supportive and excited. "You are growing our child," he said in wonder, placing his hand on her swollen belly. "You are doing the most incredible thing a human being can do. How could I be anything but amazed by you?" When Joseph was 2, they had a daughter they named Charlotte, after Mariah's mother. She was a spirited child with Yates's adventurous nature and Mariah's intelligence. Watching Yates with their children, so patient and playful and loving, made Mariah fall in love with him all over again. Mrs. Barnes remained a constant presence in their lives, doting on the children as though they were her own grandchildren. She lived to see Charlotte turn 5, then passed peacefully in her sleep at the age of 62. She left the Diamond Bar Ranch equally to Yates and Mariah in her will, along with a letter expressing how proud she was of them both. "You took something broken and made it beautiful," she had written. "That is the greatest gift anyone can give to the world." Yates and Mariah ran the Diamond Bar together, true partners in every sense of the word. The ranch prospered under their joint management, gaining a reputation for quality horses and fair dealing. They hired good people and treated them well, creating the kind of working environment where everyone felt valued. As the years passed, they added 2 more children to their family. Another son, Thomas, born in 1889, and finally another daughter, Grace, in 1892. Their house was always full of noise and laughter and love, the exact opposite of the silent, tense home Mariah had endured with Theodore. She sometimes thought about her first husband, especially after they received news that he had died in prison from pneumonia in 1890. She felt sad for him, for the wasted life and the pain he had caused, but she felt no guilt. He had made his choices, and she had made hers. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Yates took Mariah back to the spot where they had first kissed, watching the sunset over the mountains. Their children were grown or nearly so. Joseph was 20 and working the ranch alongside his father. Charlotte was 17 and courting a nice young man from a neighboring ranch. Thomas was 13 and full of mischief. Grace was 10 and already showing signs of having her mother's teaching gift. "You ever regret it?" Mariah asked, leaning against her husband's solid warmth. "Taking on a broken woman with so much baggage." "You were never broken," Yates said firmly, wrapping his arms around her. "You were battered and bruised, but your spirit was intact. That is why you had the courage to walk away. And I have never, not for one single moment, regretted loving you. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Mariah Brennan." She turned in his arms and kissed him, still feeling that spark of connection and desire even after 20 years of marriage. "I love you. Thank you for teaching me that I could look at you all I wanted, that I could be free." "You taught yourself that," Yates replied. "I just reminded you it was possible." They stood together as the sun set in a blaze of glory, two people who had found each other in the darkness and built a life filled with light. Behind them, their house glowed with lamplight, and they could hear their children's voices raised in laughter. Mariah thought about that terrified woman who had stumbled into the general store in Eager, too afraid to lift her eyes, and marveled at how far she had come. She had been beaten for looking at another man, but she had found a cowboy who said she could look at him all she wanted. More than that, she had found a partner who saw her as an equal, a love that was built on respect and trust, and a family that gave her joy every single day. The Wild West could be a harsh and unforgiving place, but it had also given her the space to reinvent herself, to claim her own freedom, and to build a life worth living. She had survived the worst that one man could do to her, and she had emerged stronger and more whole than ever before. As they walked back to their house together, hand in hand, Mariah knew that her story had ended exactly as it was meant to. Not with a fairy tale prince rescuing a helpless maiden, but with a woman saving herself and a good man walking beside her as she learned to fly. The ranch would continue to prosper for generations. Joseph would take over the Diamond Bar when Yates and Mariah were old, running it with the same principles of fairness and respect his parents had taught him. Charlotte would become a teacher like her mother, eventually running her own school. Thomas would become a veterinarian, the first in the family to attend university. Grace would become a writer, documenting the stories of the West, including her mother's tale of survival and redemption. But all of that was still to come. For now, Yates and Mariah were content to simply be together, to enjoy the life they had built, and to know that love, when it was real and true and grounded in mutual respect, could heal even the deepest wounds. They lived to see their children marry and have children of their own. They watched the Wild West gradually tame itself, becoming less frontier and more settled civilization. They saw the turn of a new century together, standing on their porch on January 1st, 1900, and marveling at how much the world had changed. Yates Pass.